This is Eric Van Buskirk, and this is the third final video about taking the results from LSI research and turning it into an actionable way to create web pages and fresh content. Please be sure that you've had a look at the first two videos before looking at this one. One thing I didn't focus on too much elsewhere in these last two is looking at how all of the words and their key metrics appear together. That may be interesting for you to see for this case study here. Again, the score being most important, and the person that's writing it needs to really understand that you need to include these and you need to talk about them more if they're appearing everywhere on these authoritative pages that Google is ranking. The CPC and the volume, they're secondary, and they kind of fall into place. I think that part of the process here will be deciding where to use some of this information for meta tags, for alt images, for important signals that we send in the way that we create a page. So that could also be included in the notes here, where we want to add a little extra oomph with some of these words or the meanings. These can be handed off as notes, as I've said. That's what I have in this column, but I think it's important to have additional information. I have not put very lengthy notes, and I would probably want to sit down with the person writing this or provide an audio to them, maybe even a desktop video like I'm doing right now. Perhaps the best of both worlds is if you, as an SEO or the one doing this research, also feel that you're a decent writer and are able to create these pages. Of course, having done this much research, a lot of times it's too much content for one person to do the research and the content creation. Creating this particular document here took me about 45 minutes, perhaps less. And so it's not very time consuming taking the information from the raw table and a graph if you wanted to, and creating some structure like this so that it can be written about. Actually, you'll notice here I just listed all the different words that were appearing, so it's very simple to see, whereas on top I did that with notes. I made a list of the words that appeared with a score of only 1 or 2. So they're right here. So I actually separated them because they're just not going to be essential. And for the ones, I did put some references here in yellow to highlight them where they were only 1 or 2 occurrences, because I thought they really supplement what we're trying to get at, or they add some detail that really help flesh out the total sum of our purpose and really round out what we want to say. If we take a look at the most important words and phrases and concepts that we want to talk about and how we can break up the structure of the web pages, here's some of the notes that I made. So these are questions here, and here's the volume. So again, they need to be thought of together, and very importantly, they need to be thought of as how important they were with co-occurrences. These are the words, the actual words that were used to ask questions, where you would want to start and explain the basic meaning of semantic web and semantic web search. There are a lot of these questions that occur with this particular core theme that I'm researching. If you were to look for something like a car, for example, a Honda Civic, you might not have as many questions because it might be something that's better understood. This is a cutting-edge technology concept that's new. There's a lot of people out there that want basic information, and you probably need to have that somewhere. After the question, which is basically, I would say, an introduction portion, these are going to be, by the way, and importantly, multiple web pages. You could probably get 3 web pages from everything that I've outlined here and from all that we've learned. You might get 5. I would say you would want to create the pages in such a way that they're at least 500 words, because Google really likes to see everything on one page as being related. It ranks more, in fact, by page now, as you may know, than it does by domain. Some pages are deemed to be extremely on target, and they'll rank really high. That same domain may have trouble ranking for other pages. So with this, I think that it could easily be 3 to 5 pages. Moving on to some of the other places that I organized here, we already looked at this one as being the sort of overview and even some of the themes that sit above the more specific theme that we're looking at. If I look down here, there's a lot that comes up, and particularly really this one term, which is a 4. It's not that high compared to all the 15s, but there's phrases that come up that talk about semantic indexing when it may not in fact have to do with the web. And this is important to understand because the web is only one network where there are documents that are latently filled with semantic words that can then be indexed. So this would be a really important topic to talk about as far as where else one might find a network of documents. And that could include something like a big website like Twitter and the on-site search that's being done there. I think if you looked even deeper at the semantic search without saying web, and you did the research, you would find a lot of different mentions of different places where there is semantic indexing. So that's important. Then I also mention here software or uses. So this has to do with semantic web applications. And of course, the person writing it needs to look a little bit, but there is software that helps to both find the semantic associations on different websites, not necessarily for SEO purposes, which is what I've been focused on here. Also here is SEO Tool. This is appearing in 3 different ways. I totaled up the search volume, and again, not as many times, but one of the things you're finding, of course, is that something that's more specific is not going to appear as many times. Something that's more broad, like these 2-word keywords that are more common keywords, are going to appear more, and that makes perfect sense. So the LSI tools, SEI indexing, LSI keyword tool, together they create a decent volume and they consistently show up. If there was one way of describing them, they probably would score much higher. So there are tools out there to do things like trying to understand what I'm doing right now, to try and understand how Google is creating semantic associations when it returns result pages. As I said, I don't really think there's any that are looking at multiple pages for co-occurrences, but there are also tools that just look one page at a time. Relationship to SEO and the effect on indexing, that was another subject that I thought should be discussed. So in that case, these words I saw as similar. Semantic indexing, LSI keyword, LSI keywords. There is the search volume again. I didn't really talk about the cost per click up here, but of course that's important as well. And these actually got really pretty decent co-occurring, even though in some cases they're not as narrow as we might think with the ones up here. Notice that they don't have the word web in them, and that's interesting. When you add the word web, you're creating a more specific intent, even though a person searching for these 2-word phrases may actually be thinking of just the web, because it's probably the most important place that you would find co-occurrences to do latent semantic indexing. To do that in a software program, like if Hewlett-Packard does it and tries to find how users are using their software, well, that's a much more specific use. The web is the big network that everyone's trying to find these associations and to learn about how this technology works with finding latent indexed associations. I then said relationship, its place in technology. So we have semantic search technology, semantic web technology. I don't remember what the question marks were for. I believe it was because I wasn't sure I had the right search volume here. And keep in mind that these are estimates of search volume because this is all coming from SEMrush, which is not quite as precise, for example, as AdWords Keyword Planner, but it's a great overview. Again, we have some pretty high ranking there. Relationships. So I found, W3C, and I also saw another instance of Tim Berners-Lee, who's I guess you could say the founder of the internet, who talked a lot about how relationships were created, associations were created from hyperlinking. So that might be a place to put that in here. I believe that was one of the ones that occurred only once, but it would make sense to include it. Then there's Google. So you have Google LSI, Google Semantic Search. They appear, 5 and 3, kind of in the middle there. 5 is a pretty good number of times to occur. And that's where we can talk about how Google is using the semantic web to understand authority and trustworthiness, for example. Then I talk about, then I put notes here about the definition as something that's organized or structured. Semantic web design, it sounds like something that's designed in advance, that's planned in advance, rather than something that's more organically being created over time. There's almost a purpose in the way the web expands over time. And it's interesting too that people call it the semantic web because it really is properly known. It's known as a proper name, and it has these concepts behind it that the people that are more familiar with this, they agree on characteristics of the semantic web. Down here, a much more broad intent, but search volume in CPC is interesting. So, this is where you can understand the really big volume for the overall, the overall word that covers so much more. Down here, I have semantic webbing. And that's interesting because it's actually a mention of another semantic process. I did a quick search, and it actually turns out to be something that's used in the schoolroom for making associations between words, but it actually doesn't have anything to do with the web. So it's not a misspelling, which is interesting because it does return information about another kind of indexing or creating associations between similar words. I like this one too because this is the kind of thing you're going to turn up when you do this research. And it appeared 5 times each. So there's not a lot of volume, but that's not as important to us as the score because the score is telling us that you need to include something. It did appear very frequently. And what is particularly interesting about this is that it's people using acronyms to describe the semantic web, and that means that this is from advanced users. I'm actually surprised that I didn't find CPC here, but the volume is so low. I'm sure some smart people are bidding on this if they want to find those that are more advanced users or those that have a great understanding of the semantic web. Coming back down here to the things that only had a score of 1 or 2 co-occurrences, here's the Tim Berners-Lee semantic web, and boy, is that a long tail word, but it actually appeared as in the same way on 2 different of the pages that ranked in the SERP. Wiki, that's an interesting one, if for no other reason that it just helps us build out a little more details with the content that we're writing. And yeah, you see that I highlighted Wiki right there. Conference, semantic web conference, only once, but hey, it's interesting that there are conferences where people that really know about this get together. Tagging, that's important because there is structured markup that is done for providing information to Google to help them structure data. And tagging is something that would probably be a way of describing some of that. Semantic metadata, another way of sort of understanding how you could provide information that would contain a more structured way of understanding the semantic information on the web. Also notice ontology appears a number of times, only once, but you have to wonder whether, again, if you look at them together, they have decent volume, and just because they're, on the edge of not being too related, they get ones, but there's a lot of ways of saying them. So maybe it would have appeared more if there was only one way to say it. Also, OWL semantic web, I have no idea what it is, but it appeared twice. So I don't have a need to really make notes here. I probably could. I mean, I think even just by highlighting, the person that's going to write about these can get an idea how to pull it in. Here's Google SW. So again, you have this acronym, and the volume's even higher, and it did appear twice. That's the end of my 3rd video, and I won't do a wrap, but I think that the topics have been covered enough if you've watched all 3 of them that there's no need. If you want to reach out to me on Twitter, here's my Twitter address. If you want to reach out to me on my website, here is my website. That may be where you are, in fact, seeing this video. And I look forward to talking to anybody that's watching this video. Have a good day.